We're up here on top of Mt Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville-Placid Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on J Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Roostercomb. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Wednesday, July 13th, the middle of arguably the nicest stretch of weather of the summer. Another sunny 75-degree bluebird Adirondack day was upon us, and there was no question I was going to utilize the day and get in the high peaks. But where should I go, I thought to myself the night before. Well, I looked at the map and I determined it's time to go back. Back there. Back for round 2 with my mortal enemy. A mountain that I have only visited one time, and I had a hellish time on it, thus never going back ever since. Also because it's really deep in the high peaks, no matter which way you approach it, so I always tend to pick a closer mountain. But it was time to experience this hike with a fresh mind, a fresh body, and see if all this time I had the wrong impression of this very mountain. It was time to revisit the infamous Cliff and Redfield. Now, I've only climbed these 2 peaks one single time, as I mentioned, and it was during my first round of the high peaks years ago, which you can hear all about on my episode entitled Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff and Redfield, where I spontaneously decided last minute to tack on Cliff and Redfield while I was standing on top of the summit of Mt Marcy, which was my final mountain of the day, according to my plan originally. But it ended up being a long, tough, and slightly regrettable decision, making for a gigantic day, which involved 2 trips through the treacherous floating logs. But now it's kind of a funny story, and it's still one of the most downloaded podcast episodes I've ever done. So if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. But now, today, it was time to revisit both of these mountains. Redfield, we're cool. I liked you. Cliff, however, let's see if I was wrong about you now that I'm fresh both mentally and physically. Let's do this. Cliff and Redfield, here we go. Cliff and Redfield are 2 mountains deep in the high peaks that require a good 7-mile approach just to get to the trail junction to climb both of the mountains. From there, it's roughly a mile up cliff through deep mud and slab climbs to the true summit. Then Redfield clocks in at 1.2 miles from the trail split to the summit as the trail goes along an uphill brook for a good portion of the trail. My plan for the day was to hike in via the Adirondack Lodge trailhead along Avalanche Pass and Lake Colden towards these 2 rugged and remote high peaks. It's a long 18-mile hike no matter which way you squeeze it, and that takes you deep into the heart of the high peaks wilderness. These mountains will make a hiker earn the reward of reaching their summits every time. "4:30 in the morning, nice and quiet here at the Adirondack Lodge. The only sound are the birds chirping. Nice and quiet, but about to sign in. 4:30 crew, just me today. About to head towards Cliff and Redfield. Yep, about to revisit my arch nemesis of Cliff Mountain. Here we go. But first, to sign in. So once again, I was out for a solo day in the high peaks beginning bright and early at 4:30 a.m. It was a quiet morning as expected at the Adirondack Lodge, where I was the second person to sign in for the day, since someone had already signed in before me heading up Mt Marcy. probably for a sunrise. And I quickly realized it was actually great that I wasn't the first person to sign in, because that 2.3-mile trek towards Marcy Dam that I've done so many times, and most of the time being the first person doing that hike, I usually encounter a lot of trail spiderwebs. However, the person ahead of me cleared the way of those spiderwebs. Fan-freaking-tastic. I don't think I walked through a single spiderweb to get to Marcy Dam, quite honestly, so that made a great start to the day. And sunrise was around 5:30 a.m., so I knew by the time I got to Marcy Dam the sun would be coming up, and that is exactly how it happened. 5:14, approaching Marcy Dam, and the sun has begun to come up. Marcy Dam, we are here, looking as glorious as ever. Oh, there's a nice haze over Colden right now. Walk over here on the half bridge. Oh yeah, there's some nice clouds, but you can still see the tips of Colden, Whale's Tail. Right has a nice bit of clouds coming from the trees below. A textbook morning here at Marcy Dam. Time to cross and head up the Marcy Brook. Marcy Dam looked great that morning as misty clouds surrounded the base of Mount Colden in the distance, while the river flowed in the foreground. Always a great vibe at Marcy Dam. Crossing over the water at Marcy Dam. Every time I come on this bridge, and every time I come on that first bridge through the marsh on the trail to Marcy Dam, it's always nighttime, so I have my headlamp on. There's the trail to South Meadow. But I always have this vision that I'm gonna cross the bridge, look in the water, shine my flashlight, and just see a giant ass Sasquatch standing there in the water. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm always on the lookout. Maybe one day. Over the bridge and through the woods to Avalanche Lake I go. I couldn't decide the night before which direction I wanted to hike today and made a very late night call. I pondered switching things up and driving all the way down to Upper Works Trailhead and hiking in via the Calamity Brook Trail through the flowed lands as opposed to the lodge, but the mileage difference really is negligible. And for me, that adds a 90-minute drive on both ends of the hike, so I opted to hike in from the lodge in Lake Placid, which is only a mere couple of miles away from my house. But then the next decision was upon me. Do I take the Avalanche Pass Trail or the Lake Arnold Trail? Once again, the mileage wasn't drastically different either direction, so I opted to go via Avalanche Pass because this would take me on a more scenic adventure through Avalanche Pass, along Avalanche Lake, and eventually to some stretches of trail that I've actually never been on, along Lake Colden and then from Lake Colden up to the Cliff and Redfield Junction. Since the last time I climbed these mountains, I approached them via the Lake Arnold Trail. So all in all, it seemed like the appropriate choice to make. Onwards towards the beloved Avalanche Pass. Just making my way up towards the Avalanche Pass Trail along the Marcy Brook to my right. Going over a little boardwalk right now. My plan for today is to hit Cliff and Redfield via the Avalanche Pass Trail along Lake Colden and then shoot up from there. Why, you ask? A, it's been a minute since I've been back to Lake Colden. B, the floating logs. Hard pass. I saw the condition of them a couple days ago, so I'm going this way to avoid them. Plus, this is also a great hike too. Great reason to go that direction. But yep, making my way. Marcy Brook to my right. And here we go. Continuing along all of these boulders that make up this trail. The trail towards Avalanche Pass and Lake Colden skirts along the Marcy Brook past a number of campsites and lean-tos, most of which were empty here on this Wednesday morning, but some campers were in the woods, sleeping still. But I continued along the trail while Wright Peak stood to the west on my right and Phelps Mountain on my left to the east. But before I knew it, I was back on the bridge crossing the Marcy Brook just before the Avalanche Pass Lake Arnold Trail junction.
And I'm back on the wooden bridge crossing the Marcy Brook. Now, when I did Marcy, Skylight Gray, Cliff and Redfield, I was in a rough shape as I was heading back to the lodge. And on this bridge, I had a fantastic conversation with a dude that definitely lifted my spirits and got me kind of pumped back up to finish the day. So that is a nice memory from this bridge. But all right, on to more ankle rolling boulder trail.
But I was making good time as expected this morning since there isn't a whole lot of elevation game up to this point. But I went right at the junction towards Avalanche Pass and continued on the small boulder-filled ankle breaker trail that this is, which is fine. It does get a lot of traffic, so it's probably a good thing that there's so many rocks. I was able to click my headlamp off around this point and enjoy the early morning in the High Peaks wilderness, the birds, the gentle breeze, and the early morning aromas throughout the woods. It is truly hard to beat, and if you know it, you know it.
Just after 6 o'clock a.m., making my way along the big cliffs on the right side of the Avalanche Pass Trail. And since it's really wet in the woods today due to last night's rain, I am just soaked from all of the brush, the branches rubbing up against my arms, elbow scratchers. So I am already quite wet, on top of the muggy, humid air that is surrounding me here in the High Peaks. But all right, here's another one of those cliffs. I'll probably just scale it real quick like Spider-Man, climb right up.
The Avalanche Pass Trail continues around the northwestern base of Mount Colden, along the base of some big cliffs before coming out at the always magnificent and always picturesque view of Avalanche Lake, with the cliffs of Colden on the left and then Avalanche Mountain on the right. Truly an amazing location in the High Peaks. And if you've never been on this trail or hiked into this lake, it's worth your time.
Really quiet here at Avalanche Lake. I have made it to the tip, sitting between Avalanche Mountain and Colden. Peaceful, quiet, unbelievable, as always. And these are quite the cliffs here. Quite the cliffs. Doesn't really get much better than this if you've never been here. You're at a backcountry lake just right between two gigantic cliffs. Pretty awesome. Onward.
After taking a handful of photos myself, I began the stretch of Avalanche Pass Trail along the water, which is filled with giant boulders, wooden ladders, and a number of footbridges. And these footbridges are attached to the side of the mountain, if you've never seen them. Referred to as Hitch Up Matilda. And this is without a doubt an iconic stretch of High Peaks Trail. Often a fan favorite and extremely scenic and in many people's trail pictures.
Almost 6:30. About an hour and 50 minutes since I started. I'm just over 4 miles in, making my way along Avalanche Lake, up the wooden ladders, across the giant boulders, over the wooden planks, along the big boulders. It's a very interesting stretch of trail. Very bridgy, very wooded in terms of bridges and ladders. But it's cool. It's a unique stretch. It's kind of a love or hate. I'm not a huge fan of it personally. Some people think it's the coolest thing in the world, so different strokes for different folks.
So along Avalanche Lake I went, as the Mount Colden trap dike was across the lake to my left, and I kept climbing and crawling my way towards Lake Colden to the south. There is a magical quality about this area in the High Peaks in particular, and I just can't put my finger on it what it is specifically, but a very magical quality indeed. And then I made it to the junction at the northern tip of Lake Colden, where I chose to go left along the Mount Colden side of the lake, as opposed to the right along the Iroquois and Mt Marshall side of the lake.
Approaching 7 a.m., and I just made it to the trail register sign in that's at the end of Lake Colden. So I can either go left towards Colden or Marcy, or for me, Cliff and Redfield, around the left side of Lake Colden. Or I could go right around the right side towards Marshall and Algonquin, and eventually the upper works too. So I'm going to bang a left, head towards Colden.
This was my first time on this short stretch of High Peaks Wilderness Trail between Avalanche Lake and the Colden Trail. But I made quick time walking down as I headed over the rocks along the base of Colden towards the southern tip of the lake. And it's a backcountry lake as peaceful as ever, especially this morning. No wind, no noise at all, just a quiet, peaceful existence nestled hidden in the Adirondack backcountry.
I am 5.7 miles in, just making my way along the shores of Lake Colden. Always a pleasure being back here at Lake Colden. There's a lot of clouds up high, so the summit of Algonquin and Marshall are in the clouds, but nice views down here. Making my way towards the junction to go to Cliff and Redfield. I'm coming for you, Cliff. I'm coming for you.
I can only imagine what it must have been like for those early explorers who stumbled upon this lake at the base of multiple high peaks for the very first time. Must have been awesome. Upon arriving at the end of the lake, it was time for another left as I head up a long uphill brook on the Mt Marcy Trail towards my eventual destination, the cairn marking the Cliff and Redfield Trail junction. And this was another stretch of trail I had yet to ever visit, and it's a great experience.
A lovely little waterfall and a suspension bridge to cross over. Always fun. And I made it across. All right, going left.
The trail gains some elevation as it runs along the opalescent river on the northern slope of Cliff Mountain, and there's some major cliffs a good 30 feet up above the river that are quite cool to look down on and see firsthand just how powerful nature is and how fast that flowing water runs. And you'll see firsthand just how these rivers slow and steadily chip away at the mountain rock over the course of thousands and thousands of years. Nature is awesome.
Some amazing, this is an amazing river cut out between these big rocks. A lot of great pools to swim in, but you'd have to be careful because you could go over a waterfall that will end your life. Pretty awesome stuff though. Just making my way towards the Cliff and Redfield Junction, where it meets up with the Lake Arnold Trail.
So up along the river I went, and I felt this 1.5 mile or so stretch of trail, which again was my first time ever on it, was a good mix of rocks and dirt. It was quite pleasing at that point in the day.
The trail from the junction to go over towards Marshall or up here towards Cliff and Redfield, pretty stellar. It's a nice mix of dirt and rocks as opposed to the non-stop boulders that have made up most of this trip so far. But I'd say this is a nice in-between of those things. You know, some roots, some rocks, and some dirt, but a good variety and a good ratio of each. Very wet back here though. I've made my way away from the river and moss runs wild. The moss is why we have such wet and fresh water here in the park. Verplank Colvin spoke all about that.
The trail along the river moves around Cliff's northern and eastern slope before arriving at the first trail junction, marking the merger of the Lake Arnold Trail, the Mt Marcy Trail, which is what I was on, and a campsite. Now, I do want to state this junction can be very easily missed, but it's marked by a big cairn, and you'll have to remember how this merger works and not accidentally continue on the Lake Arnold Trail towards Marcy, which would be really easy to do. But knowing that ahead of time, I was ready for it and looking out for it. But upon getting there, I knew it was time to bang a right, and then a 0.1 mile trek took me to the day's big destination, the trail junction for Cliff and Redfield. I made it. That long 7-ish mile approach was complete, and now it was time to officially summit some mountains. But which mountain to climb first? That was the question.
8:17 a.m. I have made it to the Cliff and Redfield junction. Whew! The sun is starting to come out, which I could definitely use because, man, I am just drenched, like head to toe. All of my clothes, my backpack are a slightly darker shade thanks to all the water seeping through all of it. But anyways, I've made it to Cliff and Redfield, and I still quite haven't decided what mountain to do first. I just don't know yet. But let's just like flip a stick here. All right, we got a light side and a dark side on this stick here. Light side, Redfield, because Redfield is good and pure. Dark side, Cliff, because Cliff is dark and evil. And all right, the dark side wins. Cliff, it is. Okay, Cliff, round 2. I'm giving you another chance, and I'm fresh this time. So let's see what impression you leave upon me. But it is pretty neat being able to see Cliff on the right up through the trees here, and Redfield on your left up through the trees. Pretty awesome. But here we go. Cliff Mountain, round 2.
After flipping a stick, it was decided. Cliff Mountain was up first. How fitting. The mud-filled football field that starts this trail was in front of me. The cliffs to climb were waiting for me, and the multiple false summits were ready to taunt me before I would arrive at the true summit, marked by a brown and yellow Cliff Mountain summit sign on top, of course. The only way to go was up. So I took one step onto the trail, and it didn't take long for Cliff to greet me in the most Cliff Mountain kind of way.
Son of a... It took one step onto the cliff trail for my boot to sink in all the way to my freaking ankle. Unbelievable, Cliff. My goodness. All right. I knew it was muddy. Here we go. Bring on the mud. I'm going to embrace it. You cannot hurt me.
Classic. And I continued on the trail, scaling the eastern slope of the mountain. And up until this point, I had not passed another person on the day, which was to be expected, really. And that's usually the case.
All right. We made it past the initial gauntlet of mud here on Cliff. But right off the bat, Cliff reminded me who he really is. But it wasn't as bad this time around, getting through all the mud. But man, almost makes me want to take a day, do some trail maintenance by taking all that blow down that's all over the place at the bottom of the trail and just tossing it on the mud to create a path for all of the High Peaks hikers. But man, that is muddy. But we're past that now, and it's time to cruise.
But the trail up Cliff is basically a mile, but around 800 feet of elevation gain or so you'll definitely work to get to the top of this summit, and especially in a few places in particular as you scale a few steep rock slabs. Fun fact, Cliff also technically sits just under 4,000 feet elevation, but during the Great Verplank Colvin's Adirondack survey in the late 1800s, it was said to be just over 4,000 feet.
I forgot how much blowdown there is on this mountain, and it's very green, very mossy. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been here. Climb has been so far pretty decent once I got above that gauntlet of mud, and the sun is out. I can't really feel it right now because I'm in a very thick canopy, but I can see it shining on the trees above. Hopefully at some point I'll get some of those sweet rays and hopefully get a little drier.
And I continued making my way up the trail, which really isn't that bad once you get past the mud pit. And it can even be a little bit of fun, albeit nerve-wracking for some moments while you're scaling these steep exposed rock slabs. And if one isn't careful, it can be tough. And if you're with a dog, I do my homework and ask other hikers with dogs about their experience here. Some of these cliffs are pretty gnarly. So I climbed up these cliffs and eventually I turned around and got my first big view of the high peaks of the day. You all know that feeling when you get your first big high peaks view. Always hard to beat. And the sun was out, the sky was blue. You're just miles and miles deep in the backcountry. It is hard to beat as I was staring at the McIntyre Range in Colden. Amazing stuff. Just sitting here deep in the high peaks on a big open cliff ledge here on Cliff Mountain. Just enjoying the views. It's fantastic. Marcy over there, tabletop, Redfield. Lots of fantastic views, just so deep in the Adirondack wilderness. Doesn't get better than this. And in a time that was actually quicker than I anticipated, I found myself atop what I knew was the first false summit, thus telling me, all right, I'm getting close. This false summit the first time around on this mountain really hit me hard. It was really hard. Anyways, the first hump on top of Cliff is like most high peaks, covered in evergreen trees, brown dirt, and incredible vibes all around. At this point, however, the trail does go over the hump and you lose about 100 feet of elevation before gaining it right back to make it to the true summit. So that's unfortunate in my mind, but it is part of the journey on this mountain trail. Then after climbing all the way back up and trudging the mud, scaling the slabs, climbing the final boulder, I was at the summit. Cliff Mountain, I am back. Well, 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 Cliff Mountain summit. It appears we meet again. There it is, 9:18. We have made it to the summit of Cliff Mountain. Cliff, we meet again. The last time I was up here, I touched the tree, took a photo, and immediately turned around. But anyways, yeah, that's a hike, all right. And even thinking about it now, at the state that I was in physically when I climbed it the first time, yeah, not surprising it was so difficult. Mentally and physically, especially for me at that point. Anyways, time to have a sandwich. I'm going to start my way back down, and then back up, and then back down, and then back up, and then back down Cliff, through the mud, onto Redfield. But first, sandwich number one. The summit of Cliff sits just under 4,000 feet at 3,940 feet elevation and is a wooden summit marked by a Cliff Mountain sign engulfed with trees. There are minor views to be had if you're tall enough to see over the trees, but even then, they're negligible. But I was back, and the last time I was here, I was in a very different state of mind, having already climbed Gray, Skylight, Marcy, back down Marcy, then over to Redfield, down Redfield, and up to Cliff, while still having that long walk back to the lodge ahead of me. Today, I was a lot fresher, and I could see much clearer as to the essence of this mountain. And I have to say, I'm still not impressed. Take that, Cliff Mountain. I will always say any day in the high peaks is better than a day not in the high peaks, and I'm happy to climb any of those mountains, but I will say Cliff still ranks towards the bottom of my must hike for fun list. I will admit. But hey, some people love this mountain. I am just not one of those people. So, now I know what you're all waiting for. James, what summit sandwich did you have today? I'm glad you asked. Today we had a buffalo chicken breast and provolone sandwich on an everything bagel. My God, was it good. It hit hard. And of course, my chip of choice, Santitas. They always go down smooth. So after about 10 to 15 minutes hanging out on the summit and enjoying the sun that was shining, it was time to begin the trek back down the mountain, since I still had some climbing to do and a long walk back to the lodge ahead of me. So off I went. And then, no, it happened. So quick backstory. Exactly 5 weeks prior, while I was on a run, I cut across a 50-yard patch of grass to get from one road to another. Unbeknownst to me at the time, there was a small ditch in the grass, but it was invisible to the eye due to the length of the grass. So as I was running, I stepped in the ditch at full speed and full weight and completely rolled my left ankle. One of those, oh no, did I just break my ankle type of moments that I've talked about here on the podcast. Except this one really hurt, and I was pretty sure I just hurt myself. So I slowly continued to walk. Okay, it's not broken, thank God, okay. And I continued my run, so it clearly wasn't broken, but man, definitely a major ankle sprain. So that night, my ankle was the size of a softball and it was all black and blue. So I knew it was a real sprain. And I did what I could over the next week. But since that happened the first time, I kid you not, I have rolled the same ankle again once a week for the past 5 weeks in all complete fluke accidents. What in the world is going on with this ankle? All of these times were just as random as the first one, and they were all the type of scenarios that would have rolled anyone's ankle. You know, stepping on that random branch that's in the middle of the parking lot when it's dark and I couldn't see it and just, of course, stepped on it and boom, roll. Stepping in another grass hole at work and rolling it again, just like the first time. And of course, all of these things happen to the same ankle. Not even the other one. Always the left. Anyways, you get the idea. So while I was walking back along the summit, it happened again. I stepped on a small exposed root on the inside of my left ankle, therefore causing me to roll it out again. Oh no, I thought to myself. Except this point, I'm 8 miles back from my car and I have a whole nother mountain to climb. But as I am one to do and one to say, oh, you're fine, just rub some dirt on it and just walk it off. You'll be fine. So I did. And I continued with my hike with a slight limp for probably about half a mile. But then I was back in action for the most part. And these random acts of rolling my ankle, however, are really making it hard to heal. But, you know, in time, maybe it will heal. Maybe. So back down, then back up, then back down, and then down the cliffs I went along the Cliff Mountain Trail. And it was at this point that I ran into my first hiker of the day, a fellow solo hiker who told me she was just here to hike Cliff because the week before, while going after Cliff and Redfield from the Adirondack Lodge, she had to orphan Cliff and only climbed Redfield, so she was back to get Cliff. Man, that is a lot of hiking to come all the way back in 2 weeks in a row for these two peaks. Props to her. Traveling those same trails, but it happens. It's not all that bad, but after a day or two, I always say, yeah, I'm ready to go back too. I'll do it again. Upon descending the mountain through the spruce and pine trees that line this mountain, I passed my first couple of the day. And while I walked past the girl, who was nervous about coming back down the trail, she looked at me and really seriously said, please be careful going down this. I could tell it might not be a fun descent for her, but hopefully it all went okay. But as you can tell, Cliff is no joke. It's not as bad as you might think, and the scientifically named and always useful technique known as butt sliding comes quite in handy on this mountain trail. So down the mountain back to the mud pit I went, and I found my trip back through the mud felt faster and smoother than my trip up. So that was enjoyable. And there it was, the cairn at the bottom of the mountain. I was officially off of Cliff.
There it is, the cairn. It is 10:33 and I am officially done with Cliff Mountain. All right, beautiful sounds of the river coming down Redfield. Nice big cairn. Someone's backpack and bear can and camping stuff sitting here at the bottom. But anyways, going to Redfield. Here we go. And fortunately, I'll be able to refill all of my water bottles because I am almost out. And I know that water on Redfield is pristine for a nice scoop. All right, up Redfield we go. 10:34.
All right, Cliff. See you when I see you. You're okay, but I still don't like you much. Now it was time to climb Redfield, which I was looking forward to because I remember it being a very fun climb. From the trail junction, Redfield is 1.2 miles to the summit with a gain of 1,300 feet. So it's not too long, but you'll work for it. And the trail begins only 100 feet or so from the cliff trail, but it's a polar opposite experience at the start. Redfield is dry and glorious. Cliff is muddy and evil. Might be time for a cliff reroute. Anyways, on the soft dirt and therefore root-heavy trail I went. What I enjoy about the climb up Redfield is once the trail gets to the river, half of the trail runs directly next to Uphill Brook, so there's lots of water options throughout the first half of this climb. The trail runs up along the river, next to the river, across the river, and even through the river. Good times. You'll see cairns occasionally and where the trail goes, and it should all make sense and kind of feel natural out there, so don't sweat it too much if that concerns you. You'll kind of be able to feel where the trail goes. And when I say the trail runs through the river, you're jumping from big boulder to big boulder, so you're not going to be getting wet or taking your shoes off.
This walk along the river up Redfield is so great, especially on a nice sunny bluebird day like today. Just perfect conditions. The sun is out now, the river is raging, and I'm starting to dry out a bit. Look at that view. Looking down the river, Redfield up to my right. We got the McIntyre Range directly in front of me. I can see Algonquin straight ahead, and then Boundary, Iroquois, Shepherd's Tooth looking very prominent from this view right here. Good stuff. A nice light blue sky with puffy white clouds.
Around the halfway point up, the river stream slowly becomes a distant memory as the trail continues up the northern slope of the mountain, through the evergreens where the delicious spruce and pine aromas engulf your senses, and you just can't beat it. I soon passed a couple guys and their dog who I'd meet again at the summit, but I continued my way up the mountain, and I was moving slower than I wish I was at this point, I will admit. Must have been tired. Maybe I was also at the point in the day where I'm just, ready to talk to people and not be in my own head and just kind of be at the summit. So I do find in those moments I probably tend to slow down and maybe lollygag a bit. But in those scenarios, the only thing one can do is keep on climbing. So up I went.
So as I climb Redfield, in the river, out of the river, along the trail, in the river, out of the river, it's interesting because I start to notice, falling down, I start to notice that I'm just kind of on autopilot. And yet, that's almost the easiest way to follow the trail. When you're on autopilot, you just go kind of naturally, I feel like, where the trail is now. Maybe that's from years of hiking in these woods or not, but it is interesting that you just kind of feel the trail. You just kind of know where to go, even though there's nothing marking it or nothing like demonstrating this is indeed the trail. You just kind of know. It's an interesting thought that I had because I'm noticing it big time right here on Redfield. Anyways, beautiful day. Keep on going. I'm about half a mile from the summit.
And there's lots of great views of the mountains throughout this climb, so make sure you turn around a few times. But after climbing up slower than expected, I knew I was on top of that mountain because I remembered a lot of it. And then I rounded the bend, and the summit sign was upon me. Mount Redfield, 4,607 feet elevation in the perfectly blue, cloudless Adirondack sky.
All right, 11:50. I am at the top of Mount Redfield. Made it. So 11:50. I started at 4:30. Whew. Yeah. A lot of hiking today. But man, the views up here on Redfield are phenomenal. Just incredible. Real good stuff.
Mount Redfield, the 15th tallest peak in the Adirondacks, was named for William Redfield by none other than my main man, Verplanck Colvin. William Redfield was part of the first ascent group up Mt Marcy in 1837, long before the existence of the very enjoyable Van Hovenberg Trail to its summit, that's for sure. And there are fantastic views on this summit. And at this point, you know my rules. 1 sandwich per summit. Time for a second everything bagel buffalo chicken breast sandwich. Let's go. If you're new to the podcast, I like bringing 1 sandwich per summit because I feel like they're real substance as opposed to snacky type foods, and they always get eaten, whether they're on the summit or maybe you have one left over and you eat it when you get to the car at the end of the day. They always get consumed. So after the 2 dudes and their dog made it up, we chatted for about 10, maybe 15 minutes, and at this point, it dawned on me. You still have a long walk back to the lodge. Better get moving. You know, as the saying goes, Marcy, Skylight Gray, Cliff and Redfield, done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. So reluctantly, I began my journey home. I had a good 10 miles of hiking still left in my day. While I was descending Redfield, there was a moment while I was standing in the river. It was the perfect view of the river running down directly in front of me, while the high peaks soared in the sky above, and you truly could just see how remote this place was that I was currently standing. And at this point, I'm almost 10 miles from anywhere. I just had one of those moments where you really truly realize, and it hits you, I am in the thick of it right now. You always see these mountains and around the towns and pictures, and you think, man, I love these mountains. But then when you're deep inside the wilderness where nobody could see you, far from anywhere, far from anyone who could come get you, it just really makes you appreciate just how incredible it is that you're able to be in these places. And just appreciate the ability to explore this wilderness, to utilize the trails that allow me the privilege of exploring this rugged backcountry. And to just exist in that moment within nature this far back, where most people will never get to. It's a true kind of a moment of gratitude in a sense. But it was an awesome moment, and I have a nice picture of it to remember. It was nice. So I continued down the river, passing a handful of hikers that I met on Cliff, and then I was back at the trail junction. I got down the mountain pretty quickly, so I was pleased about that. And now, as the saying goes, the long walk back to the lodge. So here we go. And I had thought about taking the Lake Arnold Trail back instead just to mix it up and make a loop out of the day as I am one to do. But ultimately I decided to avoid the floating logs. And because I wanted to hit Avalanche Pass just one more time, since I've hiked the Lake Arnold Trail so many more times than I have the Avalanche Pass Trail. So this was a true out and back kind of a day. Back to Lake Colden, along the lake to Avalanche Lake, through the pass, back in the woods, along the Ankle Breaker Trail, all the way to Marcy Dam, and back the final 2.3 miles to the Adirondack Lodge. Not much to report here. However, it was a long, sweaty day, but there it was, the trailhead, and the day was in the books. All 12 and a half hours of it, car to car. I would say this day probably took me an hour to 2 hours longer than I anticipated, but that's fine.
And I am back at the trailhead. Just under 12 and a half hours. Time to kick off these kicks and slip on those slips, aka my Crocs.
So I signed out for the day, popped off my boots, and put on my Crocs. Oh yeah, that is why we hike. Some people hike for views, some people hike for health, some to escape, and then others, well, we hike for that moment of glory when you take off your boots and socks at the end and slip on your Crocs. Well, another successful day deep in the high peaks, revisiting my arch nemesis, Cliff Mountain, and his best friend, Mt Redfield. All in all, it was a great and much-needed day in the heart of the high peaks region. It's always a pleasure getting back into the Lake Colden part of the high peaks and experiencing those views firsthand. Since I always see photos from all of you listeners in that area quite regularly, it's really enjoyable being there myself each and every time, and especially on summer bluebird Adirondack days. But the 19-ish mile day was in the books. Nice to see you again, Cliff Mountain. I would say I probably won't see you again, but we both know that I'd be lying. I will. Any day in the high peaks is better than no day in the high peaks, regardless of what mountain you're climbing. So thanks for listening to my story from the return to Cliff and Redfield, and thanks for listening to another episode of the 46 of 46 podcast. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and check out everything I have to offer on 46of46.com. From my downloadable ebook outlining everything you need to know to have a successful Adirondack 46er journey, my guide services that I offer, virtual guiding, real guiding, my blog, and much more. 46of46.com. Check it out. Well, thanks for listening. Check back on Fridays for new mountains, new stories, new guests, and new episodes right here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. Everything, every time, banana peels and all. See you on the trails, folks.